Environmental Policy is the title of Chapter 9 of the Knudsen book on agriculture and food policy by Knudsen, Penn, Flitchbaugh, and Outlaw. The environmental policy really got kicked off in 1972 with the Environmental Protection Agency. And that's an agency that was bequeathed a lot of power. And prior to that time, there really wasn't a lot. So in agriculture, it was quite a change to know that there's an EPA out there and has opportunities to provide regulation and such right at the state level. So it got right down to the home farm for the first time. When we take a look at EPA's involvement, it's really been quite less developed in agriculture, and more so for industrial and municipal. And what we've noticed there in point pollution, or defined points of pollution, it's easy to find this continuous pollution, and in the form of smokestacks initially, and wastewater, and other forms of pollution that was impacting our environment. So EPA obviously went after that first, and farming and agriculture on the farm has been a lot less. You know, when we think about it, we call it episodic pollution from farming occurs when we have heavy rain and runoff, or continuous hard-blowing winds, or we see some of the pollution that we see come into from feedlots and such if they're not properly designed and cared for. So a big difference here you'll notice in point pollution, these industries and such have passed on the costs for the regulatory and maintenance and cleanup to the consumers. And so EPA has had a lot of experience working with business, or in industry especially, over the years. Non-point pollution, dealing with farmers is really a relatively new thing, and it's very difficult to identify the pollution many times, because it's if there's pollution, it's not easy to see and it's not continuous. And lastly, we also notice that being unpredictable, but we also can't pass on these costs to our consumers in the form of our product. And so just the difference between our biological crops and stuff, we notice that indeed there is an inability to recoup any costs that it may take. There's some real limits of the marketplace in curbing pollution. Where there's a market failure is that it's the inability within agriculture to incorporate all the costs of production by themselves and make a profit. And then in addition to that, we have the social costs of producing a product that are experienced by the consumer and others, and this is seen as odor. It might be the sound of agriculture, the machinery traffic, the machinery itself, the water runoff, all a part of this industry. And so it's very difficult to couple the two together and be sure that the producer is getting that full price in the marketplace. So we talk about market failures and externalities. Market failures leading to environmental degradation result largely from externalities, which get their name from being external to the market. An external cost is one that is inflicted by environmental degradation. Like, for example, if we go ahead and improperly dispose of animals, there's oftentimes an odor that comes from that. And perhaps there's water issues some people perceive because of livestock being in the water, and down the river people don't want some of the scent that's associated with that. So when we take a look at the cost of environmental degradation, manure is one of those things that is an extremely concerning outcome of the industry by non-farmers. The full economic costs, and so this is one of the things that we have to keep in mind here as producers, and people involved in agriculture, it's the production costs plus those environmental costs incurred that are paid by society via taxes and frankly by reduced productivity. So all the soil erosion and water and air issues are borne a little bit that way. And so business and our people get involved in legislation. And an example is this, the buffer strips is one of the ways to try to handle water quality and soil erosion in such near bodies of water. Another thing, limit of markets and curbing pollution is pressures that develop with growth. When we think about it and we look and see pictures from around the world, quite often we have early development going on in other countries and even the states in some places. It causes natural resource degradation and abuse. Now, we've had examples of seeing it in our own construction industries within agriculture in the United States. Obviously in China, there's been a lot of aerial photos of that. Historically, we saw what happened in the Fertile Crescent and other countries around the world. Currently, we're seeing what's happened in the last 25 years in the rainforest. And so those are things that come into play in development along the way. What we do know, as people's incomes change and improve, what we do see too is that people are more willing to spend money on taking care of that, the forests and land, the soil, the air, and the water. We also know that when people are, have their food needs and home, housing and such, and fabric, they will spend more money on trying to take care of these things for caring for our planet. So who develops and implements policy on the environmental level? And one of the groups, of course, that we're quite familiar with is the federal EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, as we said earlier. And there's different committees in Congress involved, the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee and the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. And so what we do know is the EPA writes the regulations for implementing this policy that comes out of Congress. They do extend some of the enforcement to the state environmental protection agencies. And so what we do notice, we have the state level environmental protection agencies usually in the state capital area or in that complexes, because they're carrying out the federal EPA kinds of things. We also have involved is the USDA is involved at the state level, local level, with the Soil Conservation Service, and they're very effective in carrying out the regulations that are actually put in place by the federal and state level. One of the things that the USDA has been trying to do is implement environmental policy increasingly of helping farmers to adjust to all the stuff that's coming down, and so such is the reason for the NRCS. So let's talk about briefly the evolution of environmental policy. It got started in the 1970s, and we're trying to eliminate hazardous waste from the environment. And we're becoming more cognizant with better science, again with better income. We're starting to look out and see what's going on to be sure our employees are having a good workplace and that we have good air and water quality. And early on, some of these factories obviously were not real good for the human situation of working there. Initial emphasis in water and air pollution was placed on point solutions, point sources of pollution having a specific source. Agriculture was given the benefit actually by being identified as non-point solution. And with the passage here, we're beginning to be able to identify things obviously much better with aerial photography and such. And so the more policies are being put in place because we can do something about it. And so that's a part of that that's really important. So the evolution broadly, that's what's going on. The conservation policy, was put into place by USDA prior and during the Dust Bowl. And obviously that was an issue there of wind erosion, but following that, of course, we had issues with the soil erosion, and oftentimes we've seen where we put together, coupled together requirements of taking care of soil water, and by insisting that drainage is taken care of properly, terraces are put in, maybe there's water storage things put in here. So since the formation of EPA, the policy emphasis has shifted to providing payments, like I said, with being sure the farmers make some infrastructure changes so that, and they do adopt better best management practices in raising crops and livestock. All this aimed at that the USDA is involved in improving our soil, water, and air quality. And so oftentimes, anytime that there's a cost sharing thing or whatever, unquestionably farmers are going to have to do some other things because of coupling these things together. And so, as we noted here, drainage, soil erosion, water storage, and terraces, all of these things are coupled activities with funding that comes from the government. The water quality started in 1972 with the Clean Water Act, and it provided for a federally mandated system of technology-based effluent standards. And it was enforced through a requirement for obtaining discharge permits. And so it's been really an important component here because of permits for livestock and poultry farmers. They're considered, those with confined, some of our confined agriculture finishing units are considered point source pollution, and therefore permitting comes into play in some cases. And so we've gotten around that by the size of operations that we put in, or size of barns in some cases. So no question that we're watching what's going into the bodies of water and what this water quality is about. So the confinement of these poultry, swine, dairy, and beef has really brought the attention of many of our consumers and other constituents involved. We are obviously quite concerned about the amount of biochemical oxygen demand put on the bodies of water, because we know that that has a real issue with our fish and other water living creatures, as well as even some of the plants. And of course, we're real concerned about how much of our fertilizers and pesticides end up in there, and this is being monitored more and more for the good of all. Speaking of pesticides, there is a concern, obviously, is it going to get into the body of water, into local drinking water, and so these things are also measured as to what is it that, what threshold points are happening in our sources of water. And so again, the consumers are concerned about the amount of pesticides, if there's any, in our water, and are we having pesticide drift when we're spraying for our crops? And then even further, there's obviously research and work done constantly with some of the cancer kinds of things here. And that, lastly, one of the major areas also that we're talking about here of ag policy is in the area of air quality. And grain elevators is one of the early things, and cotton gins that really spewed out a lot of dust and such, and so they caught the eye early on. Likewise, the amount of particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, nitrous, methane that come out of a confined animal finishing units has been of great concern too. So Air Quality Clean Air Act of 1963 and others in 1970, 77, and 90 established a strong federal presence by directing to set different standards, and so farmers are having to live with that. Likewise, occupational safety and health, that our workers wear it. That too has an impact on agriculture.